In this lesson, we will learn how to animate with constraints. Constraints allow us to control the transforms of an object in a way where we can actually have that object be controlled by another object, or several objects if we'd like. We have an entire reference library on the constraints in Maya if you'd like to learn more about all of these really neat tools. But let's go ahead and work with the parent constraint, which kind of acts like parenting, only doesn't control scale at all. It's only going to control translation and rotation, and then we could actually animate on top of the constraint to create a blend. So we'll go ahead and take a look at all of that in this lesson. And honestly, it doesn't take much time to set up. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we have in this scene. I'm going to hit play. You can see that the character gestures for the sword. All right, cool. Now, what you'll also see is we have this locator. This acts as the sword's control. But the reason why the locator is here is so that we can offset the sword from it to correct the animation if we need to. So that's the beauty of working with control objects. We can go ahead and actually constrain the locator. And you'll see that when we move the locator around, the sword will follow. But then if we need to add any offsets, we can go ahead and grab the sword and offset it directly. Really neat. And you can learn about this in Introduction to Rigging in Maya. Alright, so what we now need to figure out is where we would like the sword to be by the time it reaches the character's hand so that she can grab the sword naturally. Alright, so let's go ahead and figure that point out. What I'll do is go ahead and just grab the locator, and we'll go to the end of the animation where she finally grasps the sword, or when she will have hold of the sword. So that's about frame 46. Let's go ahead and translate the locator over to her hand. We'll go ahead and press the F key to kind of zoom in a bit so we can navigate around the sword. I'll now go ahead and rotate the locator up to follow the orientation of her wrist. And then we'll just go ahead and kind of translate the sword in place until it finally looks like she's holding this prop. Alright, so that looks good. Let's go ahead and take a look at this from another angle. We might have to kind of rotate this locally in the x-axis a bit and then kind of translate it in. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. Alright, very nice. So now we know the values that we need to go ahead and make sure that the sword is naturally placed in her hand. Alright, so here's what we can do now. We could actually constrain the sword to her hand from here, and then we can go ahead and animate a blend where it goes from the starting point back to her hand. So let's do that. We'll head over to the Show menu, and let's go ahead and show our NURBS curves. Alright, from here, we simply grab the object that we would like to control the constrained object with. So I'll go ahead and grab her wrist control. We can now go ahead and shift select the object that we'd like to constrain down. It's going to be her locator. Now we can head over to the constraint menu and grab the parent constraint. If I were to go ahead and reset the settings, you'll see that by default maintain offset is on. For a lot of our constraints, maintain offset is actually off by default. But for the parent constraint, since it's pretty advanced, and since we would like to work with maintain offset now so nothing flips out, that's why this is the default choice. Because you'll see when this is off, if we were to go ahead and turn this off and choose apply, the sword is going to rotate to match the transforms of this object. But that's not what we want. We want it to be exactly where we placed it. That's the beauty of maintain offset. If we were to go ahead and press the Z key to undo back, we can now turn on maintain offset, and watch this. When we go ahead and choose add, now it's constrained and it stays in that same spot. Alright, fantastic. So now what we can do is go ahead and work on animating our blend. So we can go ahead and grab our locator here, and let's go ahead and take a look. Alright, so with it selected, you can see we have this constraint node. We could also access it from our outliner. So with the locator selected, I'll just go ahead and open up the locators group, or its hierarchy, to go ahead and find the parent constraint. You'll see that if we select it from here, or if we go ahead and grab the locator and then select it from the channel box, we have this weight channel that we can use. So when we go ahead and turn that off, now we have control over our locator. However, this is not going to create a blend. We need to create a blend parent channel. How do we do that? Well, remember, from our preferences, we could actually go ahead and animate on top of these types of connections. If we were to go back to our preferences, let's take a look at animation. Remember, we made sure that we can blend with existing connections like constraints. So we can blend keyframe animation and the result we get from our constraint. So here's how we do this now. Let's go ahead and make sure that we create a keyframe. And we'll go ahead and do that, let's say right around frame 1. So on frame 1, we'll go there and we'll press Shift W and Shift E. Very important, we need to go ahead and key both channels. You'll see that if I were to go ahead and undo back and just press Shift W, it looks like we're now controlling both translation and rotation because it turned from blue to green. But don't let that fool you, because if we want to animate rotation as well, if we want that to be affected, we need to go ahead and keyframe both translation and rotation. So again, undoing back to where our channels are light blue, I'll go ahead and press Shift W and Shift E. And what that does is it also creates a blend parent attribute that we can now use to control the blending here. You'll also see that if we were to go ahead and go to our weight for the constraint and set that to 1, we can still go ahead and work with the blend parent set to 0. It's simply going to blend now from a state where the constraint is off, when this is set to 0, to when it's set to on, or when it's active. So we can leave this alone. We can leave that weight at 1 or 100%, and now we can go and control our blend from here. So here's the beauty of this all. Let's go ahead and now zero out our locator to bring it back to where it was before on frame 1. All right, sweet. So now we can go ahead and choose when we would like the sword to float over to her hand. All right, so that should be right when she starts to open her hand up. So let's say we do this. On about frame 17, we'll go ahead and click right here on our blend parent channel, right click and choose key selected. Now, let's say we go to about frame 30, and we'll go ahead and send the blend parent to 1 or 100%. Take a look, it now has snapped to her hand. But watch this, when we start to scrub through, you can see that we have this really nice looking blend, this transition where she now holds on to the sword. Sweet, and if we wanted to, we can delay this key. Let's say if we think that the animation's a little bit too fast, we'd like to have her grab the sword a little bit later, let's say around frame 35. Well, how do we grab this keyframe? Well, we know how to do that. We'd simply go ahead and shift select the frame and start to grab right here in the center of our selection to drag it over to 35. All right, so now when we go ahead and play through the animation, you'll see that it'll go a little bit longer. It only gets to her hand at 35 instead of 30 now. Beautiful stuff. And now we have this really nice looking hold here. How cool is that? Now what's another way we can move that keyframe? Let me go ahead and undo back. All right, so I'll go ahead and grab the locator just to make sure the key is back on 30 instead of 35. There we go. And now what's another way we can go ahead and take this locator and make sure that it won't reach her hand until a little bit later? Well, of course, we can use the graph editor. Let's go ahead and take a look at what happens with the blend parent node inside of the graph editor. I'll go to our perspective and graph view. All right, you can see we have this custom channel here, blend parent. When we're working with custom channels, you'll find that they are white by default. So let's go ahead and grab the blend parent node here. We'll go ahead and press the F key. All right, let's go ahead and take this keyframe and let's go ahead and move it over to frame 35. All right, so right now we know it's on frame 30 and it has a value of 1. I'll just go ahead and take this value and set that to 35. And now you can see the key has moved over instantly. All right, fantastic. So there we have it. We've managed to animate the sword right inside of the character's hand in no time at all using a parent constraint. And then again, if you'd like to create offsets, you can go ahead and keyframe the sword freely. You see that if we go ahead and offset it from the locator, all right, you can see how wonderful this is because now we have an extra level of control, and when we want it to fly back to the locator, we'd simply go ahead and zero out those translate channels to make sure it's right on top of its parent. Beautiful. So again, in this lesson, we've learned how to animate with constraints in Maya.